Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody out there, and welcome to my usual Saturday D&D stream. Yep, we are live. We are live today. We're going to be a little more focused in today's stream, actually. Usually, I've got a big topic I'm talking about, and we'll bounce around from a few things and then move into story time. Today, however, I'm doing very well. Thanks, Coops McCoops. Today, we're going to be just talking about some ancient lore of my homebrew world, and then we're going to be rolling in to a pretty long story time today, because I'm looking to finishing up the entire tale of Scaren and the party's first real-like arc. I'm sorry to say, I will have to leave early today. I have a short film I need to act in at around 5. Alright, Coops, no problems. We should be done with the lore by then. Unfortunately, sounds like you'll probably be missing a bit of story time, but we'll try to move through things nice and pleasantly. Per popular request, I think everybody could see, we got ourselves a fireplace. I might have to grow it up a little bit bigger once we actually get into story time. But since we're starting with lore, I'm just keep it right here to keep myself nice and warm. I got you, Coops. So, let's get right on in here. Tardy here to party? Yes, we are. Let's see. So, as discussed in my very first stream, the world had a very long ago beginning, based around the gods and the primordials. After a series of wars between them, however, a force simply called Ao split the world in two, granting a world to the primordials and one to the gods. But on the one for the gods, he commanded that the gods should walk the material plane for a time, creating or guiding the people and races that would populate it. Ao, simply spelled A-O, is actually a figure that exists in traditional D&D lore, and one I borrowed to have changed his personality a bit. Yes, for people looking into it, let's see if this is the right one. No, that's not it, actually. I'll actually go take a quick look, because I believe there is a command that can get you the source, but I think most easily I'll actually just grab the link myself. For anybody looking to play around with the map generator I use, or really the map editor I like to use, that is it right there. Asgar's Fantasy Map Generator. It has a lot of tools that you can use, but for now, at the beginning of the world, the gods walked across it. The gods of the dwarves moved about in the far north. Ooh, let's get rid of this. Close, get out of here. There we go. Let's see. There we are. So the gods of the dwarves walked around in the far north, the elven gods through the kingdoms of Phaethen. All the gods walked about creating and guiding the races that would make up the mortal races of the world. However, in the far south, in a tundra desert, a region now known as Barenverden, none of the gods walked or created anything. This place was considered of no real value, of no importance to anybody. Because of this, it would develop into a place where all those who had left the gods behind would journey. Most commonly, the tieflings, tainted by infernal or abyssal bloodlines, would escape the views and the judgments of the other races and the gods by going to this far southern direction. With many of them being resistant to the cold, it was an easy transition. and to no longer have to trudge underfoot of the great titans of the mortal gods. There was much relief here. Of course, South Coast, West Coast? Well, we'll see. Some humans also ventured here, and other races who chose to abandon the gods that had either created or guided them. Many came here simply to escape the worlds that were overseen by the walking gods. Of course, this led to great hardship. Without the gods to provide them with all they would need, with inspiration, with resources, they had to develop themselves to create societies to obey the rules of, to develop their own basic tool crafting and resource gathering. In the very early days of the first mortal age, they were desperate in many ways. That desperation eventually crafted out 16 major tribes in Barenverden. At least 16 major with their subsidiaries that stretched all across the region. With so much territory, but so few resources to divide amongst it, these tribes very quickly entered into great deals of territorial warfare. With their long infernal bloodlines, too, sorcerers became a major resource for each tribe, as whatever tribe could bring forth the greatest magical or military might in a conflict would seize the most advantageous resources, the best regions, and stretch their influence across more subsidiaries. This time of tribal warfare, of magic incorporated into their militaries, of just having to develop things on their own, gave them the greatest advantage of any region. 4. Eventually the gods returned to the plains and left the mortal world without their influence, thus marking the beginning of the Wild Age. This was called the Wild Age as without the gods to provide them with what they needed, without guidance, without influence, without the infinite resources that the gods had provided their people. All over the world, every mortal race had to start from scratch. They had to begin again, almost set back to the Stone Ages. They had their inspirations from what the gods had done. But only one region had developed metalworking. Only one region had a military history. Only one region had developed a dependence and a support of their sorcerers and their influence on a battlefield. And that was Barenverden. Thus, Barenverden began the Wild Age as the most developed, militaristic, and terrifying region in the world. Though at first the world was lucky that the 16 tribes maintained warfare and territorial conflict between them. Otherwise, they were likely to have invaded and conquered the entire world. Until one day, the Viku tribe, as you see here, began a great unification. Through military influence, diplomatic pushes, trade networks, and the promise of greater wealth and territory, the tribe of Viku slowly united all 16 tribes into one major kingdom, the Caliphate of Barenverden. And once they united, there was only one way to go. United under one tribal leader into a new caliphate, they began what was known as the First March of Barenverden. Their troops coalesced, gathered, and pushed northward in a great swell, comparable to the great Hunnic or Mongolian invasions, and they were unstoppable. Where some of the tribes or city-states in the north had developed bone or cloth armor, had begun the very early stages of learning how to smelt copper, Barenverden marched out with brass alloys, scale mail, archery, weaponry, and most importantly, war mages, trained from birth in how best to show magical might on the battlefield. The first march of Barenverden would push out and conquer almost all civilized regions connected to them. Their push would take over the entire area, known now as the Empire of Light. They would push northward, conquering over half of the upland duchies. Far to the east they would push, and they would begin cutting into the wild badlands that all believed to be unconquerable, due to their high orcish, goblin, and other monstrous populations. But this great invasion of a godless tribal military led to a great event in the world. The crowning of the first king that would mark the beginning of the Empire of Light. You see, this region that the Barenverden had conquered had been blessed by the gods of their time, and firmly believed in the lawful good gods present on the world. They believed in the power of Bahamut, Ilmater, Aminater, Tor, and many dozens of others. And under the enslavement and military might of Barenverden, the faithful of these regions came together and crowned their first king. He would then state that the gods' power would be brought back to the world to fight back the evil of these tribes. And thus began the second mortal age, the Age of Devotion. This first great king of the Empire of Light would invoke the power of the gods and establish the first clerical orders, create the first teaching grounds that would become the Paladin schools. He would slowly unite every city that believed in the power of the gods above. And they, in their mass rebellion, blessed by a magic power that Barenverden could not push against, could not foresee, and could not defeat, would create the Empire of Light and end the first march of Barenverden, pushing them far back into their tundra south, where they would slowly rebuild, learn from their lesson, and prepare for their next march. Thus ended the first march of Barenverden, and began the expansion of the Empire of Light, unifying all people who believed in the lawful good gods of the great pantheon. They would expand greatly, finding allies all over the world, though focusing on what they had learned from the first march, incorporating metal armor, learning the beginnings of smelting alloys to make better weapons, and finding out how best to put their clerics and paladins within a military force. All this preparation would be tested then, when the second march of Barenverden would come, only 50 years later. Both sides had learned their lessons of the last war, and thus came one of the bloodiest and most vicious wars this world has seen. For the second march of Barenverden was the march that showed two forces experimenting with military tactics. Both sides armored and armed with weapons, having magic to use. This next war would be vicious and terrifying, and fought almost exclusively between Barenverden and the Empire of Light. Very little is known about this second march, except its brutality, and that eventually Barenverden retreated back. Whether they had claimed what they had wanted, or had been cast aside by heroes of that age, is unknown. Simply that was the end of the second march of Barenverden, and the Empire of Light's ascendancy, as they had proved that through their guidance and military prowess, the horrid evils of Barenverden could be stymied, blocked, and sent back to whence they came. Now comes the third march of Barenverden, one to claim a unique name, as it was one of the strangest wars that had ever occurred in this region. The third march of Barenverden was more commonly known as the March of the Veiled Emperor. No one knows what began this march, as it seemed far less coordinated than the past two Barenverden marches, as their militaries marched haphazardly, without proper logistics, and almost in a frenzied state. The established military and bordered fortresses of the Empire of Light saw themselves making easy defensive victories against the militaries of Barenverden, until the Veiled Emperor would enter the battlefield. This was the darkest, most powerful figure to emerge from Barenverden. A warrior clad in pure black armor that leaked smoke and shadows as they crossed the battlefield. But the Empire would send their paladins to smite down the front lines of Barenverden. The Veiled Emperor would march in with his own private bodyguard of shadowy monstrosities and dark demons, and slaughter any force they encountered. The third march of Barenverden was defined by this one figure and his entourage being an unstoppable arrowhead, a spear thrust that broke every fortress, that shattered every front line, and was considered unstoppable, but was also strange in comparison to the disorganized and seemingly unprepared troops that marched on Barenverden's side. The Empire of Light was terrified, though, for nothing they did could stop the Veiled Emperor. No hero, no paladin, no clerical order could cease this one figure's march northward into the Empire of Light. Until there was a great battle, or there was supposed to be. The forces arrayed, and the Emperor strode forward, demanding a diplomat from the Empire of Light. You see, before the Third March, the Empire had sought to create some influence within Barenverden, and thus sent out many invitations from nobles or tribal leaders within Barenverden to come into the Empire of Light, to try of their society. And the Veiled Emperor asked for one of these diplomats to be presented. The man was brought forth, and the Emperor demanded their execution. No reason was given. Nothing was understood about this action. But it is known to this day that the Emperor slew that diplomat. And upon slaying of this Barenverden diplomat, the Emperor turned on their heels and returned home, their army seeming to dissolve like the shadows that encircled their armor. To this day now, no one in all of the world will welcome diplomats from Barenverden, for it is believed that should another person from Barenverden be welcomed into the wider world, the veiled emperor will return to slay them and all who stand between that emperor and their target. 2 more marches would occur from Barenverden and up to modern history, but none of them would hold quite the same influence as those before. At this stage, the Empire had developed themselves into a military powerhouse that, although always on the brink of collapse, could call in heroes to defeat any final wave from Barenverden. Thus, though these marches were terrifying in a broad sense, were great moments in their time, none held the influence of any of the first 3 marches. The 5th march, though, was over 3,000 years ago, and many wonder why no march has occurred from Barenverden since. There are many reasons why preparing a march in Barenverden is a difficult task. The first being that the region is believed to be cursed by Shadowfell. Shadowy undead beings rise up in the vast tundra deserts, creating very difficult logistic systems to maintain, and communication between the tribes to be unwieldy, particularly in the winter months. But most recently, there was a great push in Barenverden, the first ever invasion of the Caliphate by an external force. One would believe that this would be some great party of heroes, or some force sent by the Empire or another region seeking to end the evil of Barenverden. But it was not. Instead, the invasion was held by a strange group of exiles called the Upvakni. The Upvakni were exiles from the Scarpi Ayari, or the Scarpi Islands. These were brutal people with a vast raiding history. There was a time, some few hundred years ago, where the Upvakni all united in a great push into the Caliphate and defeated their vast armies, moved into their capital, and killed many of the nobility of Barenverden. But that lore lies more so with the history of the Scarpi and the Upvakni. And for today, we end our discussion of the ancient history of the Caliphate of Barenverden. Yep, toasty lore time. And there you go. That is the history of all 5 marches of Barenverden, the great tribal force and the first great military power in the world. That which sought to conquer it and was only defeated by the influence of the gods in the way of creating great paladins and clerics, and the unification of the region known as the Empire of Light. There is a bit more of their lore to cover in the future when I discuss the Scarpi and the Upvakni. But for now, I believe that is good enough for the Caliphate. After all, they have been quiet for a long time, with no marches coming, nor threats issued. Within my current campaign, they seem to be not of a great threat to anyone. So then, how is everybody doing? I'd like to take a moment for everybody to pull themselves from story time a little bit. I know I do get into it at times. I see some people out there enjoying the comfy fire. Yep. Doing all right. I'm glad to hear that, Coops. And I was thinking into going into a bit of lore on the Empire of Light, expanding that a bit, Or if people want to break up kind of how story time is going, if people would like to, I could swap into talking more so about my campaign, going over the next few chapters and finishing what I call the saga of Scaren. See, the fire is very nice. Not bad, not bad. Got some rum and a fire of my own. Feet up and kicking back. Doing well. Level up my D&D character for the game Sunday afternoon. Hell yeah. Hi, Eric. I'm doing good. How are you? I'm doing very well. I would not complain about story time since I have to leave in about 20 minutes. All right, then. We will go into story time next. Before that, though, does anybody have any questions about the Caliphate? About Barenverden, about their marches? Perhaps about the Veiled Emperor, or any of the great wars, or the people that live here? I'll give, say, 5 minutes for people to talk about Barenverden, the marches, or to ask questions, or ask for how I came up with them or what my inspirations were. Once we get through that, though, we'll be swapping on over to story time and trying to cover as much of the Scaren saga as we can. So, how spicy are the nachos there? Oh, they can be very spicy at times. Depends on how wealthy you are. You know, after all, peppers and spices can be very expensive in a tundra desert where nothing grows. Oh shit, better get my notes out for the record. Oh yes, it seems like a lot of my party members are actually here, excited to hear my perspective on the first few sessions. So, any lore questions for anyone? Any curiosities? Or are people actually more so excited for me to roll on into story time? They best not metagame. Well, I am making sure to hide as many details from people who might be metagaming as possible. After all, some of the best parts of telling a D&D story is revealing in time with the players to my audience. So most everything that is a twist or turn that you all will be hearing will be stuff my party has already learned or encountered. Wood bogus? Well, I'm mostly just talking about the lore of one of the nations within my world. I have a good 74, so I think of the broad scale of things. You didn't miss anything too huge, though I am very proud of Barenverden. You're going to metagame to make sure you fall into the traps being laid? Okay, understood. Well, seems like we've got no specifics for Barenverden, so we'll go ahead and talk about the campaign story time. So, I actually have one question for you guys. Would you like me to leave the fire where it is, keep me nice and cozy, or do you guys want the fire to take over most of the screen? That way everybody can feel a bit cozier during story time. There's not a lot of details actually on the map, so I'm good with doing either if everybody has a preference. That's some wrinkled brain stuff. I am the advanced wrinkled brain. None shall know more than the tardigrade. Full screen the fire, yeah? Well, that's one vote for it. Anyone else? Anyone else? Full fire. Fire is nice. I don't like that you're zoomed in on Scaren talking about covering the screen of fire. Hey, no giving away. No giving away what's going to be talked about. All right. We'll make this fire nice and toasty for everyone. There we go. There we are. Ah, that is nice, isn't it? How's everyone feeling? Feeling warm? Feeling toasty? Feeling excited for story time? There we are. Well then, we shall return to the campaign, I believe. For those who were not here in the beginning, as a quick recap, the party had collected from many different directions. in the city-state of Scaren, some coming to spy for a nation, others coming to escape a distant war, and some seeking answers about their past. The party then grouped together and joined up for a simple job of killing some wild animals for coin, and then bringing the carcasses back into the city. However, there they learned that the mayor who had offered them such good coin was in fact stepping on the toes of local butcheries. So, to avoid any unfortunate influences with the locals, the party chose to sell their goods and wares to the local merchants instead of to the mayor himself, thereby losing a bit of coin, but gaining a bit of safety. Oh, Coops, sounds like you get full story time. After collecting their coin and deciding to work together a bit, they made some friends in the city in the form of a local herbalist named Dea, who brought a few of them about on her daily check-ins with different families. While moving about, they found that one family had gone deeply into debt to a local loan shark, and that their son had been taken as collateral. Unwilling to let this go, the party collected together and decided to try and save the boy for this family. Some of the party were driven by a desire to do the right thing. Others by a concern for the safety of the child. Others to find out about the underground of this city. And some simply because they had nothing better to do. They began by finding the warehouse that this underground group operated from and spending a night breaking in. They discovered a ledger there that held, unfortunately, coded messages about the dealings. They found messages about owed money, about Vader fish, a phrase the party came to believe meant slavery. And they found messages referring to some dry-pressed goods, such as pine wood and flour, neither of which made quite sense with being dried-pressed, though they could not fully determine what this code referred to. Unfortunately, while breaking into this warehouse, one of their party members was caught, and while almost everyone was able to make a dash from the scene, Milo, the bard, was taken in for questioning by the guards for why he and his friends broke into the warehouse and stolen property of the local warehouse runner, Gabriel, who the party believed to be secretly running a slave trade. Milo then made his arguments to the chief of the guards, explaining that he believed that dark deeds had been run from here, that people were creating loan sharking, moving drugs and slave trade. Of course, Milo unfortunately had no solid evidence to present. And Gabriel was a very clever man. Gabriel then explained to the chief that if these people had been dealing with one of his workers, he would make sure to try and help the guards seize this man. Milo did know that the people who had gone into debt had spoken to one of his workers, a tiefling named Gale. So Gabriel agreed with the guard captain, saying he would make efforts to try to find out what Gale had been doing, and if it turned out he'd been engaging in illegal activity, that Gale would, of course, be turned over to the guards. Thus Gabriel and Milo left, though not before Milo was told, for breaking into Gabriel's warehouse for the theft and destruction of property, he would owe a geld to the guard, and that he would not be allowed to leave the city till repairs had been made and the goods returned. Milo thus returned to his party and explained what he had found out and what he had told the guards, though it turned out he had been followed. Guards then came in and seized the stolen goods and informed the party that they should work to keep themselves out of trouble. Now, entirely irked off, the party began a search for more information. Some of them went about trying to find out where the slaves were being held. They believe it had to be a barn inside the city, and spent their day questioning many bar owners and finding different connections to Gabriel. While Pharaoh went out, she spoke to Gabriel herself, trying to guarantee that he was in fact someone working in illicit ways. She told him that she was looking for Gale, that she had hoped to buy some drugs from the man. Gabriel looked at Pharaoh, the Aarakocra, and was entirely fooled by her bluff. He explained to her where that she could find Gale, and he told her that she should tell Gale that he's being thrown under the bus, and that he needs to make quick egress from the city. Pharaoh agreed and headed out, finding Gale at his house and explaining that he would be the fall man for the discovery of the slave trade within the warehouse. Gale understood and explained to Pharaoh that she could have his stash of drugs for letting him know in advance, and that if she had any future notes or messages for him, that she could find him at a local greenhouse where most of their drug trading went on. Then Gale left his home, seemingly to go to that safe house he had explained to her. After being unsuccessful in finding the barn where the slaves were held, the entire party reconvened, where Pharaoh told them what she had found out. Gabriel had no solid evidence to be brought forth to the guards, but was definitely in charge of this system, and had told her that he was throwing Gale under the bus. Gale knew this and had put himself in a safe house, a greenhouse behind a local herbalism shop. The party then agreed that they would catch Gale, question him, and try to bring him before the guard as chief evidence against Gabriel, and hopefully would find the location of the lost slaves there. So, the party headed off to the strange purple building owned by a local gnome who sold herbalistic goods, knickknacks, and was always willing to pawn an item or two. The store, however, was not what the party was interested in. They wanted to get to the greenhouse in the back. Farah said she would keep an eye on the shop owner. After all, she wished to stay out of sight of Gale. Gale had grown to trust her, and in case things went bad, she figured this would be a good tool to use. The party then snuck towards the back of the shop, some of them unfortunately making a bit of noise as they approached the greenhouse. They approached the door, swung it open, and a majority of the party rushed in to find the greenhouse empty of any people. There were plants growing in many different gardening sections. And towards the back, there was a bag. Seemed like a traveler's pack that had been abandoned there. Moving slowly, examining every nook and cranny of this greenhouse, they worked their way towards the back corner. Along the search, they found several stashes with illegal drugs. They found vast quantities of Ludden, a smoked stimulant that is known to be very illegal within Scaren. Yes, Aarakocra burb. They also found a few bottles of orb mead, a hallucinogenic popular for those who wish to have visions of their past. And finally, a strange tin of black pellets that no one in the party recognized. The party worked to gather up a large amount of these drugs. Thank you very much for the gifted sub, Gremlin. The party worked to gather up these drugs. They might be valuable, or at least useful in the future. Eventually, they made it then to the back of the greenhouse. Searching about, they found a corner that had been cut open and clearly showed the markings of where a man had crawled from the building. It seems they had been heard on entry, and that Gale had made a quick escape of the building. Tortuga then ran outside to try and find the trail, but it was quickly lost in the city streets. That left behind Rasmussen, the dwarf fighter, and Malachite, the ranger, who approached the pack that had been left. They reached out towards it when something tickled the back of Rasmussen's mind. He had been involved in clearing men out of mines, caves, and tracking down criminals, and something about this pack seemed trapped. He told Malachite to give it a quick once-over before she opened it. And Malachite did. Upon examining the pack, they found that inside was actually a series of string that hooked up to a large container of oil, lamp oil, that had been stored inside it above a cracked open lamp structure. If the bag had been opened carelessly, it would have ignited the oil and likely set the entire greenhouse ablaze. However, upon discovering this, a quick cut of a single cord rendered the trap useless. Inside the pack, they found a few notes, a half-written letter to some man in a far-off city, and simply pocketed the oil. Perhaps it would be useful, perhaps not. Still, they were lucky to have found and disabled this trap before they had been stuck in a building well and truly on fire. We will see if that pattern continues, Coops. The party then emerged out of the greenhouse and found a pharaoh outside and explained to her that they had found a great deal of drugs, but that Gale had escaped. They asked if she knew where he might go, and the only place she could think of was his home. So the party collected together and began moving towards Gale's house, only stopping briefly to inform some guards that the gnome was running a secret drug trade, and they could find all of his drugs hidden under the greenhouse. They watched for a moment as the guards arrested the gnome and brought out tons of illegal substances. The party had successfully disabled one of the great machinations of the underground of this city, cutting off the biggest grower and distributor of illegal substances here. Gabriel would feel that in his pocket, or he might, depending on how long the man lasts at all. So the party began moving slowly towards Gale's hovel. They did not know if he would actually run there for safety, but decided it was the best place to begin looking. While moving there, though, Pharaoh spotted someone in an alley. It was Gale, trying to get her attention. She made an excuse to separate from the party in order to best maintain her deceptive alliance with the man. So the party headed onward to his house, as Pharaoh stopped into the alley to have a talk with Gale. Little did both of them know that the monk Tortuga had snuck to the edge of the alley following Pharaoh to see what exactly she was up to. I have beats written down, Coops, but actually no script. I do appreciate the compliment, though. We will return to this alley discussion, but first, the rest of the party was able to find Gale's hovel without issue, though they found it mostly abandoned. A dirt floor, a single bed, an unlocked chest that seemed to have been entirely cleared out. It seems like Gale had in fact ditched the place. However, Malachite the Ranger did notice that the dirt around the bed had been scraped up in a straight line, as if the bed had been slid from one side of the room to the other, on multiple occasions. They moved the bed and began digging into the dirt ground. At first, it felt a little insane to be digging randomly, but then the soil became loose. And then a box was found buried 3 feet under the floor. Lifting the box up, the party members here opened it, and found inside a small collection of drugs. They found a strange wooden box that one of them recognized as a sender's envelope, a magical object able to send sheets of paper from one location to another. And most strangely, they found a single copper penny, seared black, with a fingerprint into its front and back. Oh, thank you very much for the follows, Agnes. The party gathered up this evidence and turned around to find that both Tortuga and Pharaoh were missing. They headed out into the streets and started retracing their steps, to try to see where they had lost them. In the alley, Gale explained to Pharaoh that he seemed to have been made, that a group of people had been tracking him and had ruined his hiding spot at the greenhouse, and that he would likely have to just keep moving about the city until the time came where he could sneak out with a caravan heading to the distant city of Andinium. Pharaoh said she understood and asked if there was anything she could do to help. Maybe he should come with her and her friends. Gale said he felt more comfortable alone moving through the back alleys, but he appreciated it and would make sure to let her know before he left. The two then said their goodbyes, and Gale made moves to leave the alley. However, Tortuga had been listening to this conversation. A bit mistrustful of Pharaoh, but more so eager to question the man, he waited silently around the edge. And as soon as Gale stepped into the road, a swift flurry of blows struck him in the side of the head, driving him into a quickly bloodied and desperate state. Unfortunately for Tortuga, though this tiefling did not bear the horns of his race, he did bear the infernal bloodline, and a gout of hellish fire lanced outward and ignited Tortuga, driving him into his own bloodied state. Seeing the way the winds were turning, Pharaoh ran up and took a swing at Gale with the blunt end of her spear, missing. Gale turned, looked at her, and said, "Traitor," before swiftly getting kicked in the head by Tortuga and being knocked unconscious. Yes, hellish rebuke can be a very powerful tool when needed, and in fact had driven Tortuga down to 1 hit point. If the man had rolled any higher, this fight would have been different. But Tortuga had a very strong sense of luck on his side. Seeing the gout of flame, the party came running down the road to find a desperately injured Tortuga, a Pharaoh, and the quarry they had been hunting unconscious on the roadside. Wishing to take the next events out of the prying eyes of the public, they grabbed up Gale and brought him to his hovel, closing and locking the door. It would take about half an hour for the man to come to consciousness, and when he did, he was bound in his own hovel, facing the party. The Aarakocra who had betrayed him, the monk who had beaten him, a dwarf he did not recognize, alongside a genasi and a halfling. The party began questioning him, asking him where the slaves were. Was he the one in charge of this, or was it Gabriel? The man was very uninterested in answering at first. He found little benefit to be giving away these questions. After all, if he was arrested, he would not be able to escape. If he sold out his compatriots, he was likely to be ganked at a later date. When Tortuga knelt before him, looked him in the eyes, and told him that he would answer these questions, or Tortuga would see to it that Gale would suffer a fate worse than those visited upon any of the slaves he had moved through this city. Unwilling to give away his intimidation, Gale maintained a distant emotion, but began offering up the information they asked for. They asked who was in charge, and he explained that he had been sent by a man named Jeremiah Copper to help this city establish its underground, to develop a loan shark system, to develop their slavery and their drug business here. But that ultimately, everything in the city was up to the purview of Gabriel. Gale was just here as an in-between for him and this Jeremiah Copper. They asked him where the slaves were kept. He explained that it was an abandoned barn located in the poorer districts, but that he, personally, was never sent there. Only Gabriel knew its exact location, and Gabriel worked to keep it that way. Finally, Tortuga asked the man an important question to him. After all, they had not solved all of the codes within the book, and one of them picked at his mind. Unbeknownst to the party, Tortuga had in fact been a slave himself. Not only that, but he knew he had been traded through this city, perhaps by Gabriel and Gale themselves. These were the men who made his life a hell, the men who had sent him to become a slave to vampires. And he thought he recognized himself in that code. He looked at the man and said, "Do you want to know why I'm here?" Gripped by fear and confusion, Gale looked into Tortuga's eyes as Tortuga said, "I am dry-pressed pine." Unfortunately, the code was not quite read correctly, as Gale responded with, "How are you a bottle of orb mead?" It turns out the dry-pressed code within the book had actually been referring to their drug dealings. The dry-pressed pine was orb mead, the dry-pressed flour was Ludden, and dry-pressed sugar was a different drug that the party had not heard of called Zolflex. It seems that Tortuga was never important enough to these people to even have his name written anywhere. He was just another slave they passed through. Unimportant, uncared for, not mattering at all. With this realization, Tortuga saw only one reasonable response. He drew his dagger and went at Gale to finish him. One fewer slave trader in the world was nothing but a service, he saw it as. However, Pharaoh was the first to move between him and Gale, quickly followed by Milo. Milo wished not to murder anyone, particularly not someone tied up, unarmed, unable to fight back. He was captured, Milo said. Pharaoh's own reasons lied more in the fact that this man had sold her the drugs she had been after, and she had found him to be decent enough to deal with. Not the leader here, so not important, but friendly enough, at least, before he had realized she had betrayed him. Tortuga wished to see the man dead. The party was split. Two members were fine with killing the man, but had no real drive to do it. One member had every reason in the world to end him, and two were actively opposed. So a quick debate of pros and cons began. This, however, was far too morbid for the new adventuring Milo, a halfling who through his life had seen mostly peace, besides a few dark deeds in his own past. The discussion of murder was too much, and he excused himself, turning to the party before he left and saying, "Please do not kill this man in cold blood." Milo then excused himself to the bar to deal with the thoughts of this strange group he had tied himself to. Thus, it was only Pharaoh opposed and Tortuga for killing Gale. In the end, it was decided to free him. Ras and Malachite had decided that this man was unimportant, and as he wasn't the one truly leading the slavery system here, it was Gabriel that they should hunt down, and quickly. Dealing with this man would likely take too much time. And most importantly, Gale offered a trade. If they let him go, he would tell them how to convince Gabriel to let free the boy they were after. The party pushed, saying they wanted all the slaves free, and Gale explained he didn't have that level of pull. But if they told Gale, or Gale told them, that if they told Gabriel that Jeremiah had ordered the boy free in order to secure Gale's freedom, Gabriel would do it instantly. That cinched it for Rasmussen and Malachite, and though Tortuga hated it entirely, the party freed Gale, saying that if Gabriel didn't free the boy, they would find him, and there would be no trade, offer, or debate next time. They would simply end him. So, Pharaoh was then chosen as the one to speak to Gabriel. After all, she had acted as the go-between between Gabriel and Gale this whole time. She approached Gabriel and told him that Gale had said that in order to guarantee his freedom, Jeremiah had ordered that the boy be set free. Gabriel hemmed and hawed for a moment, then finally said, "Fine. Tell Gale I'll set him free. That I want no more of this business, and that he's taking the fall and getting the fuck out of my city." Pharaoh agreed and left, and told the party that tonight Gabriel had agreed to find the boy, to free him, and to set him out on some city street near a bar where he would be easily found and returned to his family. Most of the party then returned. And Gabriel, I don't know exactly. That's a very specific event that I don't quite remember, but if you can end up remembering that, you're free to bring it up. I'm mostly moving through trying to get as many of the chief moments as I can here. Oh yeah, for everybody just coming in now, Juniper actually played the character of Pharaoh. So, most of the party returned to the bar to find Milo and to talk with them and explain that they had chosen not to kill Gale and in fact had set him free, and that the boy would be free the next morning. Tortuga, though, was still seething a bit at the choice that had been made, and more importantly, didn't trust any of these slavers. He decided he would track Gabriel. However, Malachite saw him trying to slink away. She didn't report it to the rest of the party. Instead, she chose to follow Tortuga and ask him where he was going. He told her he didn't trust Gabriel, that he would follow him and make sure the man let loose the kid, and maybe find out where he was hiding the rest of the slaves. Malachite is a confusing person emotionally, as hard to read as a rock and seemingly shockingly naive. She shrugged and said she would come with Tortuga. She didn't know why the rest of the party wasn't coming, but she would see what would happen. Thus the two waited outside the warehouse until late at night, when Gabriel, alone, left the building, made his way into a distant district, eventually into an old, abandoned city street. Many of the buildings run down. Hovels are entirely abandoned. Gabriel entered a small hovel that seemed... Ooh. Thank you very much for the follow, Pure Polar Panzer. Gabriel entered a small hovel that seemed unlikely to be large enough to hold a large number of people, and was gone for several minutes. It'd be about a quarter hour before he came back out with a large sack over his shoulder. It looked like a person, a small person. Gabriel placed the sack down at the side of the street, uncinched the top, and revealed the boy's head. His eyes were glazed over, shifting in all directions. He had clearly been drugged so as not to remember what had happened. Thinking his job done, Gabriel dusted himself off and began moving down the street. He did not hear the silent footsteps approach him from behind. He did not hear the rage that was inside Tortuga as he lashed out at this man who had traded him into slavery. And he did not hear the sound of his own neck breaking. He was dead before the final struck hit. He was dead before he hit the ground. Gabriel fell and would not rise again. Tortuga looked down at this man he had just killed. It had not been his intention, but the rage had overtaken him. He had hoped to take the man alive, to question him, to turn him into something. Then the moment was gone, and Tortuga felt only relief at the death of this man, this vile traitor of people and drugs. Malachite came running out and approached Tortuga, saying, "I thought we were going to capture him." Tortuga shrugged and said, "I overdid it. Let's go into that house. He's got to have the slaves hidden somewhere." The two then approached the hovel and slowly opened the door. Inside they found an old wooden bed frame, but no mattress. Nothing was in here except they saw a back door. That must connect to a building. Tortuga had sent Malachite to go retrieve the man's body. They would have to find somewhere to hide it, or at least get it picked up and ready to move to the guards. Gabriel was evidence, in a way. The clearing of what they had done. Tortuga approached the door and put his hand on it. For a moment it felt a bit more resistant than a normal door, but he was too caught in his own emotions. He wrenched the door open and heard something snap, something metallic go click. And then he was blinded by an explosion of flames. The door had been rigged, it seemed, with a similar trap to what Gale had hooked up to the bag in the greenhouse. A large barrel of tar and pitch was set underneath a broken lantern. When the door was opened rushedly, the lantern was flicked on and dropped into the barrel. This caused an explosion of fire that sent Tortuga reeling backwards. But worse yet, it set off the trail of tar that littered the back alleys and coated several nearby buildings. It seems that this was Gabriel's ace in the hole, a way to guarantee that no evidence of slavery could be found. Within minutes, the entire district began to go up in flames. Tortuga ran out of the hovel, which was already billowing acrid black smoke, and ran to Malachite with the body over her shoulder. "We've got to do something." Malachite took the body, and they went back into the house and placed Gabriel in the bed frame, tossing over some more flammable materials to make sure he would go up. If all the evidence would be gone, they couldn't be found with his body. Best to leave it here, and to be found amongst the charred piles. The two then began to run from the district, though. It was now wholly inflamed, being abandoned, and during a drier time. The entire district was going up, unstoppably, billowing out a noxious, poisonous, tar-filled smoke. Calls of alarm went up in the city and made their way back to the distant tavern that the rest of the party had been drinking at. "Fire! Fire!" the calls came out. The party emerged from the tavern to find an entire quarter of the city was inflamed. Setting about to different tasks, some of the party members joined bucket lines to try and douse nearby buildings to prevent the spread of the flame. Others with more medical training began going about and helping people who had inhaled this acrid smoke that filled their lungs with tar. Still others began breaking through houses trying to get people out before things could go up in flames. The only party member moving slowly was Tortuga. He walked through the streets with a young boy in his arms, covered in smoke and tar. The stake had set this building alight. He grappled with the fact that the slaves were likely in one of those abandoned buildings now engulfed in flames. He grappled with the fact that he had killed a man in rage. He looked down at this unconscious child, the one thing he had saved. The boy was brought back to the tavern, though it wouldn't be until morning until the entire party learned that he had in fact been saved. Tortuga and Pharaoh then moved to take the boy and bring him to his family, though they agreed they'd do so once light had actually come. This early morning, Rasmussen then finally had an idea. He had been the least interested in this job. After all, the poor family couldn't offer them any pay or gifts in recompense, and he was a bit more of a coin-driven man. However, the city on fire is a decent distraction, and now that he knew Gabriel was dead, no one would report or come looking for anything missing from his warehouse. Rasmussen, in the very early dark hours of the morning, then headed out to the old warehouse, deciding to turn the place for any quick valuables he could collect. As he approached the building, though, he saw another man nearby, a hornless tiefling who he recognized as Gale. Rasmussen approached the man who had told them how to get Gabriel. Gale turned and, recognizing the dwarf, seemed to take a defensive posture, but Rasmussen calmed him, saying that he bet they were there for the same reason, and that, since Gabriel was gone, there was no more need for this. Gale nodded, produced a key he had to the warehouse, and let the two of them in. They then turned the place for any valuables they could find. Rasmussen finding a pair of magic clubs, able to electrocute the target they strike, as well as pocketing a few other valuables that have been stored up here. Gale collected some notes and some products that were apparently owed to his employer back in Endinium, one Jeremiah Copper. Before the two left, though, Gale approached Rasmussen and asked him to return the copper penny that his party had found, that he would need it if he was to get on Jeremiah's good side. Rasmussen didn't understand, but felt no need to push things any further, and handed the coin back, not telling Gale that he had pocketed the ledger that recorded all of the evil doings going on in this warehouse. After all, Rasmussen had a plan to get his entire party freed of any charges here. With that, Gale made his escape in the night, with the distraction of the fire being far better than a leaving caravan. He was able to make it out of Scaren unfound, and with everything he needed to try and convince Jeremiah that it was Gabriel's fault that everything went up in smoke. Rasmussen took the ledger and the evidence he had stolen from the warehouse and made his way towards the guard captain's barracks, deciding he would display all the evidence and try to get everyone's names cleared. The rest of the party worked to try and help as many people as they could. And then as light broke over the side of the valley, they took the young boy back to his family and were showered in thanks and gratitude for it. They had succeeded in their assigned job, but a large portion of Scaren burned. Many had died. And Gabriel was never able to be questioned. A rumor began that night that Gabriel had, in fact, been a villain of the city, but more of the cultish kind, that he had been attempting to summon demons and had sacrificed a quarter of the city to do so. That's why the smoke was so noxious and dangerous. It was not of this world, but of the hells. In the early morning hours, people began talking of Gabriel's curse. And across the city, Rasmussen arrived at the guards' barracks, ready to make his argument for why the party was innocent. And there, I would very much like to take a quick break. A bit of a stretch and a moment for everybody out there to pull themselves out of that deep trance of a story. How's everybody doing? What do people think of the story so far? What do people think of the characters, the party, and everything? Well, thank you very much, Reginomics. I'm trying really hard to keep everything moving at a good pace. 57? Oh, yeah. It was later told to the party that the total number of people that died in that fire was about 57. Luckily, that district of the city was mostly abandoned, but still quite a few were caught up in the smoke and the flames. Relatively speaking, it was very small for the size of the city, but still a heavy weight on someone's consciousness. The party sounds really cool. Not hurt by your story. Nice. Okay. So, yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think of the party's attempts to figure this out? Milo. Hand grip. Milo. Oops. They were trying to make a meme. The bird is horny? Oh, you think Pharaoh is horny and that's why she liked Gale. Well, Juniper, why did Pharaoh like Gale? No! Bruh, you haven't even seen horny yet. Oh, God. Yes, we're definitely going to have to finish up the Scaren story today. Once I've had a moment to rest, I'll go back into it, because I want to hurry everybody along to the meeting of Aquila Andrana. Bard go boop. Pharaoh just respects him. It is very morally not great. Just like Hitler. Alright. Now then. Rasmussen approached the guard barracks, evidence in hand, hoping to be able to resolve everything quickly. He asked to see Fox, the man Milo had said he had spoken to, and was quickly brought in, especially when he said he had evidence on who had started the fire. Upon talking with Fox, Rasmussen began explaining that Gabriel had been the one to start the fire, technically. That this ledger held all the answers for why things had gone the way they had. That there was evidence of drug use, of shark loaning, and of slavery within it. Fox was taken in by all the evidence set before him. But as Rasmussen began explaining his party's involvement, Fox had more questions. Rasmussen said that Tortuga had been there when the fire had started. Was Rasmussen sure that he wasn't involved in the starting of that fire? What was their connection to the slave trade? What happened to Gabriel? Where was he? Tortuga killed him. Well then, Tortuga also would need to be questioned. Rasmussen then was placed in a holding cell as men were sent to grab Tortuga and bring him in for questioning as well. After all, they couldn't resolve this without getting full understanding of what happened. Both men were then brought back before Fox, and their bags were searched. Unfortunately for Rasmussen, he still had most of the drugs he had snatched from the greenhouse on his pack, as well as a single interesting metal seal, an object bearing the marking of Polemont, the southern neighbor of Scaren. Unbeknownst to the party, Rasmussen was actually here to spy on Scaren. Polemont had been making diplomatic efforts to try to get them to join their mighty nation. Scaren was a interesting city-state caught between very powerful forces, and Polemont believed they'd be able to pressure the region into joining them. Rasmussen had been sent here to find out about the factions, the lay of the land, and to discover if diplomacy or military action would be most needed. Upon seeing the seal, however, Fox told his guards to leave immediately and to fetch the mayor. This was beyond him. What was a Polemonte official doing in his city tied to these dark events? Tortuga, too, had to grapple with questions of why Rasmussen was here. What was his connection to Polemont, and what was happening? Eventually the mayor was called forth and beckoned in. He was caught up by Fox saying these two had been involved in the fire, and they claimed it had all been caused by Gabriel, that there had been a slave system going on. But, most importantly, the Rasmussen was found to have a seal of Polemont on his person. Upon seeing that, the mayor turned to Fox and told him both these men were free to leave. Nothing illegal had been found on them. They had been involved in no illegal actions, but they would leave the city immediately. The mayor then told Fox to give him a moment with Rasmussen and Tortuga. Confused, Fox stood and knew he wouldn't be able to challenge the mayor on this. These two would be let free for something to do with Polemont. The mayor then asked Rasmussen why Polemont had sent a spy into his city, what he was doing here, and why they would not just simply allow him to slowly prep the city for a diplomatic turnover to Polemont. Rasmussen explained he had been sent here to make sure that everything was going according to plan, and that no additional help was needed to shift things in the direction they would need to shift. Angered, the mayor told Rasmussen that he would free him of this one event without consequences, but he would leave the city immediately, and he would tell Felix Augustus, the man who had sent Rasmussen, that should they send another spy into his city, the deal would be off, and Scaren would never join Polemont. Rasmussen nodded slowly, returned his items to his bag, waited for Tortuga to prep himself, and they left. They would have to ask Rasmussen some questions, clearly, though most importantly, Rasmussen knew he would have to find a good reason to leave the city. It was no longer safe for him here, and He didn't wish to muddy the waters any worse than they had been. Returning to the tavern, Rasmussen and Tortuga explained that everything had been told to the guard captain and that they had been freed to go. Well, mostly. They would have to help a group of guards that was leading a caravan off to a nearby Pulamont encampment. That upon doing that, Milo would be freed of his geld and be no longer required to remain in the city, and that everything that had happened would be overlooked by the mayor. Much of the party was confused. They don't know what had gone wrong here, but many party members were relieved to be free of the city that they had very indirectly burned, a place that held very little care for them. Plus the thought of making a few extra coins by guarding some caravan to just a few hours outside the city seemed like easy enough coin. The party convened that early morning and met up with a small group of 4 guards and 4 wagons heading southward towards Pulamont. They would be heading to an encampment somewhere near the border of Pulamont and Scaren to drop off supplies. Their job was to guard it on its trip and then to never return to Scaren. Yes. We are missing one detail, aren't we, Pharaoh? For that is what I wish to conclude the saga of Scaren with. As Rasmussen had gone off to report what had happened, and Tortuga joined him, as many of the party members slept or worked to return the boy, in those dark hours of the morning, Pharaoh crept away from her party. With the drugs she had bought from Gale in hand, she needed to do something here and quickly. The god she worshipped was irritated with her lack of diligence and had threatened to remove the gifts she had. Pharaoh moved swiftly through the city towards the area where smoke still billowed and embers collected. On the outskirts of that burnt region, many now homeless trudged through the city streets, delirious, nearly unconscious, sleeping in alleyways, rained down by ash. Pharaoh then set herself in an alleyway and waited, till she saw an old woman, exhausted, on the verge of collapse, hobble past. Thank you for the follow. Pharaoh approached the man, or the woman, and said, "Excuse me, are you all right? You weren't caught in the fire, were you?" The woman shook her head. Her house had been burnt down, but she was only suffering from having inhaled some of the smoke, but she was better off than many others. The woman followed Pharaoh down to her sitting spot and rested with Pharaoh. She explained that she had no family in the city, and now with her house gone, she would have to find some way to live. She told Pharaoh she would be heading westward. She had a distant brother who lived in a nearby nation. She knew he wasn't wealthy, but she would do everything she could to earn a room in his home. Pharaoh nodded and told the woman that if she was still in any pain, that Pharaoh had some medicine that could help with the smoke. She handed one of the dark bottles she had bought from Gale to the woman. The woman looked at this Aarakocra dressed in all white, holding aloft a weapon, dressed in plate mail and looking the spitting image of a knight or a paladin in shining armor. She smiled and thanked Pharaoh as she drank deeply of the vial. She felt her tiredness build an instant, as she drifted to sleep, resting on Pharaoh's shoulder. Pharaoh heard the hunger in the back of her mind, for God knew what came next. Pharaoh lifted the woman, and with some effort flew her onto the roof of the building they had been leaned against. She wanted to work without prying eyes. From her pouch, Pharaoh produced a familiar dagger to her, one she had used dozens upon dozens of times before. She brought the dagger to the side of the woman's face and began to carve the flesh from her skull. She began slowly removing the skin and flesh from the front of the face when the pain woke the woman from her drug-induced slumber, and she began screaming. Upon realizing the job was not fully done, Pharaoh ripped the woman's face using her talons to dig in deep from her skull and cast it aside, plunging the dagger repetitively into the woman's throat. The woman's scream turned quickly to a gurgle, but not quickly enough, as voices began calling from the streets that something was happening. Cornered, Pharaoh's wings fluttered out as she flew into the sky. She hoped no one had seen her face. She would return to the party in the morning, having ditched the vestiges she wore that night to ensure no blood was visible. And she assumed no one would take a note of her dressing simply in her armor. She would have to find somewhere to fully burn them, but for now she kept them locked away in her bag. Hopefully no one could go through that. Unbeknownst to the party or to Pharaoh at all, luckily, the rumor of Gabriel's curse took what Pharaoh had done and attributed it to demons. Not only was Gabriel's curse the mark that he had tried to summon a demon into this world, not only were those acrid flames signs that devils had walked and burnt the city, but many people claimed to have seen a winged demon snatch a woman and murder her before flying away into the sky. Pharaoh was very lucky, as all those who had seen her believed her a demon, and none of her party members were any wiser. That night, though, Pharaoh slept well, as her god whispered to her in her sleep, "Well done." Her dreams were warm and pleasant, the breeze about her inviting and rewarding. She knew she had done well enough to please the God of her people. Thus the next morning the party gathered to follow the caravan and guard it as they left Scaren for good, left behind the ashed, burnt city, the evidence of their wrongdoings, and, in more ways than one, burnt the bridges that would have connected them forever to Scaren. Thus ends the saga of Scaren, and thus begins the party's movement towards Polemont and the meeting with Felix Augustus. Thank you all for coming and listening to the great telling of my campaign's first arc. We have several more ahead of us before we shall ever approach where the party currently is, far off in a region called Taverthia. But I do hope you all have enjoyed the storytelling and the secrets that are obviously growing. And with that, we will end story time to a degree. Though not the stream entirely, do not worry. simply, I would like to move us on to the final section of the stream. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Questions and plans. Okay. Okay, that's what we like to see. Evil characters deserve rights. As someone playing a witch who may not be a drug dealer, I stan evil characters. Our pleasure. Oh, hell yes. Yeah, that was great. Thank you for the story. Bye, Scaren. I hope find your demon bird slaves. I don't normally like listening to other groups' D&D stories, but you tell it well. Thank you very much, Reginomics. I deeply enjoyed it. Such a delightful thing to wake up to. Eric, bring up the Milan meme, please. It's the final countdown. Okay. So, I've got a few requests, but while I'm working on them, I would like to say right now, everybody, that we're now in question time. If you have any lore, world, or any D&D questions for me at all, now is the time to start bringing them up. If you want to know how I build my homebrew, if you want to know about any of the items I've talked about in the past, or anything about my campaign, all questions are open. We're in the big Q&A time. Once we get through the Q&As, I'll be going into talking about my plans for the next few streams, and we'll be seeing what people really want to see next time. So, let's see. Yeah, see, I'm just straight up a drug dealer. What do you think of the shifter class? I know the shifters have a race, but maybe you mean that. I like the race to a certain degree. I think at times it could be a little weird. I don't really ultimately like most of the races who one of their main feats is having talons, just because 90% of the time you're always going to be better off using a weapon. Though talons can come up really clutch in situations where you're not allowed to bring your weapons. I think it can be played too well, but I almost always prefer having feats that are a little more broadly and less specifically useful. Let's see here. Where's Tortuga's dad? Stop that Largo. No. You guys don't get super big backstory spoilers. Big, even more so how? What is big? I'm sorry. So, would you be able to, the guy in the paunch, could you give me a full question there? I'd really like to get into that, but I'm not trying to, I'm a little confused. Let's see. Is Tortuga single? Yes, Tortuga is single. It's your Pathfinder shifter class. Oh, actually, I've never played Pathfinder. I've played D&D Advanced, I've played 4th edition, and now I'm playing 5th edition. He's only 26 or something. That's like a baby for an elf. That is elf baby years. Absolutely true. It's why I'm not big on the new werewolf barbarian subclass from Tasha's. I haven't looked a ton into Tasha's. I feel like they added probably too many items for a single expansion, and it's a bit muddy right now what all's in there. Where's my dad? Tortuga, you know where your dad is. Tell us where everyone's dad is. Okay, I'm gonna have to start ignoring my party members here. What other RPG systems do you play? So I've played a lot of RPG systems once. In college, I actually was studying RPG game design for a period of time and ended up having to play through a bunch of systems. But D&D is the only one I've been able to maintain consistently playing at this time. A few other really interesting ones is Call of Cthulhu. I find super interesting, though really hard to get into. And I've always really wanted to try out a Vampire the Masquerade module at some point. Let's hear. They went to get some smokes. Yeah, everybody's dads went out to get smokes and didn't come back. Okay, can I actually talk about this for a moment? I need everyone to be aware that there is a meme now in my party, and I think in a lot of parties, that you're not allowed to be an adventurer unless you have either a mommy or a daddy issue. And everyone in my party has fucking daddy issues, and I don't know how to deal with that. It's just a party of daddy issues. Holy shit, really? That is cool. Are you going to host a D&D game on stream? No D&D stream is planned right now for me. I think I'd like to someday, but I think that would be pretty distant. And I'm not looking to do any of my sessions with my current party live, simply because that wasn't discussed during our session 0, and I would hate to kind of put that onto people who are not prepped to do that from the beginning, just because some people might have different feelings about what characters they would have made or played if they had known they would have been going live at any point. Why is everyone's dad missing? They're gonna have to tell you why their dads are missing. How much of your campaign is homebrew? So the entire setting, a ton of items, and actually I have a few homebrew classes I put in there. I do have a list, actually, of a lot of homebrew rules I have. It'd be hard for me to say how much, but like the baseline rules, a lot of them are the same base system, and a lot of like the really old lore I'm taking just straight from normal D&D lore. But I'd like to say I'm basically within a very big homebrew setting with some specific homebrew rules placed on top. But most of the baseline rules, mechanics, and like god systems are still fundamentally based in traditional lore. Let's see here. Vampire is great. Fate is also fun if you want something really customizable. Okay, big foreshadowing. Yup, seems legit. That's true. Same. No, it's mommy issues, right? Some people have mommy issues. Everyone's got some daddy issues, though. Daddy issues are better, not gonna lie. Yes, I have more than a daddy issue. How? Keep the story straight. I want my dads to get together, form an adventure party of their own, and then the moms. Dad one shot. Eric can be our dad now. Yes. Do you want me to be your dad? Coop. Chimmy Joe. Did you two clean your room, sport? As soon as you guys get that done, we can go and have some good old father-son baseball together. 2 out of 3 of Perch is homebrew, lol. Yeah, Perch is playing my homebrew class. I only have one homebrew class I play with right now called the Shade, and that might be what we'll be talking about next session, actually. Let's see here. Do you use any house rules to replace existing systems? My D&D table uses cardspirations rather than the standard DM given inspiration. So, I do not play with the inspiration variant rule. However, if you guys want to take a quick look, I have a collection here of some of my home rules. The first one's called Cool Stuff at the Dump. This is to discourage int from always being the dump stat, where you can gain bonus skill and tool proficiencies for having more intelligence. I made my own flanking system because I didn't want to just work around like an advantage system, but I wanted to reward clever flanking. And I have a lot of like specific homebrew rules, especially my drunkenness chart here, which I play around with. Let's see here. They all went to Scaren. Thing got a little heated. Yep. It's going to be like a month before they even meet Perch. I know. I swear he was not. Alright, baseball sounds fun. I don't know how I feel about that. Links. All Dahumi's dump charisma. Okay, yeah. So if you guys want, I can actually... One second. I'll grab up... Let's see here. A copy... Wait. Change. Let us get a viewer link. And here you guys go. This is the Google Doc for my house rules. There's a lot of stuff here, including some magic items and just kind of me trying to create a poison chart. But most of the top section is just a lot of the house rules I play with and that I enjoy and have made myself. I'm too cool to play with anything lower than a 14 charisma. Hell yeah. Alrighty then. So, now actually comes the planning point for my next D&D stream. Obviously, next time we'll be doing some more story time, where we will be discussing the party's journey from Scaren to Arena, the capital of Polamont, and the task they are given there. But I would also like to figure out what our main topic of that stream will be. A few options we can put out is much like I talked a lot about the history and lore of Barenverden. I could do another really big deep dive into one nation's lore and history. I have 74 of them, so at some point we do need to start working through all of them to make sure I can get all of my world lore out there for you guys to watch. Definitely gonna shamelessly steal some of these homebrew rules. Hell yeah, dude. Get through them and tell me what you like. Another option I have, though, is going through specifically my homebrew rules, talking about why I use certain ones and not others, what ones I made myself, and how I balance them. And we can have a big discussion about just like homebrewing rules and stuff like that. Another big option that I've teased at is me going through all of my homebrew races and classes I've made so far. Talking about how I homebrew a race or a class, how I balance them, and getting all of you to take a good look at my 2-year project called the Shade Class and seeing what you guys think of that. That'd be nice. Eric's Country Compendium. Time to fill a short film with about baseball bat cultists. See ya, everybody. Okay, have fun, Goops, with your strange short film. So, right now I'm going to work on making a poll, and I'd really like for everybody to tell me what you really want to see next stream. Whether you want just a mega story stream is something I can do, whether you want another country deep dive, whether you want to look into like my homebrewing rule systems, how I make them and what I use, or if you want to go into like my homebrew races and classes and look at the ones I've made and see kind of how I go about that process. Let's see here. What do you want to see next stream? We got mega story time. We've got country deep dive. We're gonna have a rules and homebrew. And we're gonna have my races and classes. All right, now pump that up to a good long 5-minute poll. Because it'll take a while before we have our answer, but that gives me more time to read chat and talk with you guys. Don't drink the yellow health potion. Hey, that's fine. That's just a good old mortem potion. Good night, Coops. As a DM that likes to tinker with systems, I personally love the house rules or homebrew race class options. Oh, tardigrade feet. You want to see my feet? Is that what you're asking? Do you want to see my little toesies? There you go. Like those toesies? Those are Peace Coops rules. This. Tardy feet. Oh wait, do you guys want a closer look at my footsies? Is that what you guys want? You wanna really? Oh yeah, nice and toasty toes. Oh, imagine a little pitter patter of teeny tiny tardy feet. Yeah, the tardy toes, roasty tardy toes, little tippet footsies. Yeah. All right, let's get ourselves down to tardy size. There we go. All right. So for everybody in the stream, I've got my poll posted up. You should see it kind of at the top of the chat. Not like everybody here to give me a vote for what you'd like to see next stream. We got a few good options, and if anybody's got something else I've maybe hinted at in the past that you would also like to mention in chat, I have no problem with taking a look at that. Deep delve on monsters of fable and urban legends in your lore. So I'd say a majority of the monsters and creatures within my lore, I am just pulling from the base rules. There are a few edits I've made to certain elements of the lore, but I haven't done it to such like a vast and deep delve that I think I could really give a great example. Hey, thank you for the sub, Leon. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Appreciate you. Though I'll definitely keep that in mind, the guy with the paunch, to kind of work up a list of some stuff that I know I'm changing for monsters or custom monsters and stuff that I'm making that people might like to learn the lore on. Oh god, my voice. I'm going to need some water soon. I thought I was already subbed, lol, my bad for that. No problem, no problem. I've only got one emote available for my tier 1 subs as is, so I do not have an issue with you guys waiting until I can get a little bit more going. How many tardy hats are there? Well... Or maybe it was just hat. 1 second. There we go. We've got a few hats. In fact, one of my redeems is about swapping out what hat I'm wearing. We've got the cowboy, the space cowboy, the Godfather, and Dapper. Right now I'm wearing my Dapper hat. Roasty, toasty, warm, and fucking mostly. Where's the maid? I neither have the maid nor the DM put into PNG form yet. And because they take up a lot bigger space than just the tardigrade with the hat, I'm going to have to do some edits on them to make them fit within the same amount of space, Gorgo. Maid tardy. Well, got to save up for Space Cowboy. Roasty, toasty, warm, and toasty. Yep. All right. Everybody getting a chance to go and vote in the poll? I think I'm seeing like 6 people voting. So if we got any lurkers that want to push me in a direction, don't even need to chat. Just dropping a vote will work. Eric, who did your art? So, actually, this picture of a tardigrade, or my base model, I got from a digital textbook about tardigrades, and they didn't credit their artist. So technically, I don't know. Please don't out me. But when it comes to actually putting hats on the image or doing all the edit work, that is me. I do all the Photoshop work in MS Paint to get everything put onto my little boy. I love talking about it because everyone I talk to that does photo editing hates the fact that I work in MS Paint. Hashtag Eric is over party. Oh no. Oh no. No, don't cancel the tardy. Oh shit. Looks like we've got our votes in. And it looks like next stream we'll be talking about my races and classes. And since we have a few minutes left, to give everybody a quick teaser. As I've already said, my custom class is called the Shade, a shadow-wielding, split-souled being that tends to harass and debuff its enemies. Of course, my races and classes that I've made are all focused around the Shadowfell and the Feywilds, which is why I call my little expansion of Fey and Fell. So some of the races you'll see include the Forlorn, dark beings cursed at birth from being born from both devils and nymphs. The Banshray, a cursed Feyan insect race unable to speak or sing, yet with a panache for blow darts and flutes. And on the Fell side, we have the Dark Creepers, and of course, the Shadowkai, the elves that were caught in the Shadowfell for far too long. We will explore all of that, along with, if we have enough time, the joke class I made that is absurdly weak and absurdly powerful, called the Fate Eater. And then, of course, from there, we'll talk about story time for the next thing that my insane party had gotten up to on their trip out of Scaren. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for enjoying my storytelling and letting me vomit my lore up onto all of you. I sure hope all of you have had fun. And if anybody ever has any lore or campaign questions, please do not hesitate to ask in the chat, or if it only comes to you later, I take no issues with answering questions sent to me through DMs. You can whisper at any time. So, before I go, is there anything else I can do for you, chat? We've got about 2 minutes before I'm going to be wrapping up my stream. So if there are any last second questions or requests, now is the time. Eric, can I get an ada? All right, I can do that. Give me a moment. You all are absolutely incorrigible. Why is it every time I see you I must... Ara. Judy, why? Better RR the Junie lol. Yep. Okay, and it looks like we had one request for it. Ora! There you go. Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Alright, y'all. And here now is where I say good night to all of you. I hope to see you next week, either for my Friday gaming stream or Saturday, where we will be learning about my homebrew races and classes, and you all will be free to tear apart my lack of balancing or creative abilities. Good night to all of you, and I hope to see you again.